All right, let's get right into this because it's a wild one. Scientists have just pulled off something that honestly has felt like pure science fiction for decades. They managed to take the entire brain of a living creature, a fruit fly, and upload it into a computer. And what happened next? Well, that's where our story really begins.
This quote from one of the researchers just perfectly captures the feeling of that moment. I mean, can you imagine? You spend years, maybe your whole career, meticulously mapping a brain, connection by connection. Then you flip the switch. You're not just hoping for some data. You're hoping for a sign of, well, something more.
And boy, did they get it. The digital brain, this perfect replica of a fruit fly's neural network, it didn't just sit there processing numbers. No, it started producing these unbelievably lifelike behaviors that absolutely stunned the scientists who created it. It wasn't acting like a program. It was acting like an animal. So, what does that even mean? What did this digital brain waking up actually look like? This is where it gets really, really cool. The simulated fly wasn't just, twitching randomly. It was performing these complex, coordinated actions. It was exploring its digital world. It was grooming its little virtual legs. It was even searching for food. And here's the kicker. These were not simple pre-programmed commands. These were behaviors that emerged naturally, on their own, actions so specific and lifelike, they went way beyond what anyone thought was possible. So that immediately brings up a massive question, right? How? How is this even possible? How can a bunch of computer code and signals produce something that looks so much like actual life? Well, the secret is in the blueprint they used. The entire foundation for this breakthrough is a concept called the connectome. Now, this isn't just a rough map of brain regions. No, this is the ultimate wiring diagram. It details every single neuron and every single connection or synapse that links them all together. It's the whole shebang. A really good way to wrap your head around this is to think of the brain as a giant social network. Every neuron is like a person, and every synapse is a connection, a friendship. The specific pattern of all those friendships, who talks to whom, how often, how strongly, that's what defines the entire network's personality and what it can do. The connectome, it's the map of that entire social structure. But building that map for an entire brain, that was a monumental task that took literally decades to complete. It was an almost impossible mission. Just to give you a sense of the scale here, let's start with the neurons themselves. The team had to precisely map the location and the path of about 140,000 individual neurons. That alone is a pretty staggering number. But then you have to map all the connections between them, and that number is just astronomical. We're talking about roughly 50 million synapses. Every single one of those tiny links had to be traced and recorded. The complexity is just mind-boggling. So how in the world did they pull it off? The process was just painstaking. First, they took a real fruit fly's brain and cut it into thousands of paper-thin slices, then took incredibly high-resolution pictures of each one. Then they had to stitch all those 2D images back together perfectly to create a 3D model. After that, a mix of AI and human experts had to trace every single one of those 140,000 neurons through that digital maze. And finally, they had to go back through the whole thing to double-check and validate the map, making sure it was as close to perfect as possible. Okay, so they have the map. It's perfect. They upload it. They press run. This brings us to the most exciting part. What actually happens inside the simulation? So to get what's happening, you really only need to know about 3 key players in the brain. You've got your sensory neurons. Those are the detectors for stuff like taste and smell. Then you've got the interneurons, which are this huge processing network in the middle that makes sense of it all. And finally, you have the motor neurons, which send the go signal to the muscles. Detect, process, act. So, to see what their digital brain could do, the scientists ran a classic test. They just dropped a digital sugar molecule into the virtual world and watched to see what the simulated fly would do. And what happened next just perfectly shows how it all works. First, the sensory neurons on the fly's mouth taste the sugar. That signal zips over to the interneurons, which process it, check it against the fly's internal state, like, am I hungry? And then a decision is made. The network activates a feeding pattern, which triggers the motor neurons. They fire, telling the virtual muscles to extend the fly's feeding tube. It's this beautiful, perfect loop: sense, process, decide, and act. Okay, now here is the single most important distinction to understand. The scientists did not program the fly with a simple command like, if you sense sugar, then extend your feeding tube. That's just scripted, programmed behavior. What they saw was something much, much deeper. It's called emergent behavior. Emergent behavior is when these complex, sophisticated actions just arise on their own, simply from all the little interactions happening inside the system. Think about it. They didn't write a script for feeding or grooming or exploring. They just built an accurate model of the brain's wiring, and those behaviors, they just emerged.
So this is the big takeaway. The wiring diagram, the connectome itself, was enough. The structure alone was enough to generate realistic, complex, unscripted behavior. The behavior isn't some extra layer of code they added on top. It is an inherent property of the brain's structure. That is a massive realization.
So the big question is, where do we go from here? This incredible achievement with a little fruit fly is really, truly just the beginning. And we have to put things in perspective. A fruit fly brain has about 140,000 neurons. Okay, a mouse brain, that jumps up to around 70 million. But the human brain, we're talking about 86 billion neurons. As you can see, the leap in complexity from a fly to us it's almost impossible to comprehend. So obviously, we are a very, very long way from simulating a human brain. But that's not the point. Not yet, anyway. This is the first vital step. It's the proof of concept. It gives us a brand new roadmap for understanding how all brains, including our own, generate behavior from the way they're wired. And that kind of leaves us with one last really deep question to think about. If a complex behavior, something that looks and feels like a choice in an animal, is ultimately just a natural result of its physical wiring, what does that imply about our own thoughts, our own feelings, and our own actions? Something to chew on.